Hello you sexy beasts, welcome back to War Thunder. How exactly do gun pods and fuel loads affect the performance of your aircraft? Now it is common knowledge that you can choose to add fuel and gun pods to certain aircraft and that those options should generally affect the performance of the aircraft in a negative way, right? In the case of gun pods, the game even tells you how much weight and drag they add, as well as how they affect the climb rate, turning ability and top speed. That being said, however, it isn't explicit how much those options actually worsen your performance compared to a clean aircraft, and what's actually worse, a full tank or gun pods. Let's understand the theory behind this first. Now, not many people know that there is actually a benefit to carry a full tank of fuel, apart from the extended flight time. What if I told you that carrying a full tank of fuel actually decreases your chances of catching on fire? I know, it sounds a bit paradoxical, but there's actually a very simple explanation behind it. When you shoot a gas tank with an incendiary round, what actually catches fire are the fumes, not the liquid itself. By reducing the empty space in the tank, you can reduce the space for fumes to mix with the air, and as such reduce the chances of catching fire. So filling up the tanks at the start of the match reduces your chances of catching on fire. But how exactly does it affect performance? Now, since the fuel is carried internally, it should theoretically only add weight, which in turn would reduce the climb rate, the acceleration and the turning ability. In cases where you have fuel tanks on the wings, it might also reduce roll rate, but we're not going to test that today. Gun pods, on the other hand, are carried externally, and in addition to adding weight and, well, the subsequent drawbacks, they will also add drag. This will reduce your top speed as well, and might even affect acceleration at higher speeds. So how can we test this? Well, first we need a subject. I've chosen the Premium BF-09 G2. This aircraft can carry between 90 to just over 290 kilograms worth of fuel and two 20mm cannons mounted in gun pods under the wings, weighing around 180 kilograms in total. In this test, the aircraft will have all modifications installed. Next, we need a tool. For the past 3 years or so, I've been using the War Thunder utility for FM testing, flight model testing. This program allows the testing of huge number of stats in test flights and exports the results into a text file for analysis in Excel. However, this program is clunky to say the least, and flight testing takes a great chunk of time. Since then, the author of this program has released a new, much better refined one, called VoidMei. This tool shows an overlay with the real-time stats of the aircraft whilst you are flying it, tracking all the info into a CSV file that you can later work on in Excel as well. The benefit of this compared to the last one is that it's much easier and faster to use. You can find links to both tools in the description below if you want to do your own testing. As far as I'm aware, these don't break any rules of War Thunder since they don't modify any files, but rather just read the localhost 8111 file, which is open to the public. That being said, however, I recommend using these only in test flights, as having on-screen stats about your aircraft in sim mode might be seen as an unfair advantage and might lead to your account being banned. Use them at your own risk, alright? Alright, formalities out of the way, let's talk testing methodology. First we need a base value to compare everything to, so I took my G2 without gun pods and minimum fuel load into a test flight. The first stat to test is climb rate. For this I've set the throttle to 100% without web and set the cursor at a 15-degree angle in the virtual cockpit. Once the aircraft reached 3 kilometers altitude, I had all the data I needed for the climb rate. Next I've tested the acceleration. For this I've turned the aircraft around to avoid running into the map border and, after stabilizing it of course, held the actual heading of the aircraft as close to 0 degrees as possible. The values I've obtained range from between 300 km/h indicated airspeed to the top speed of the aircraft. Speaking of top speed, this one we can simply directly read off of the game. In this case, we reached 496 km/h indicated airspeed at 3 km altitude. To minimize inaccuracies and standardize the testing, I've reduced the range of data later on in Excel to only present values between around 350 to 450 km/h. Finally, I need a base value for the turn rate. The tool registers this one in G. 1 G equals the acceleration caused by the gravity of Earth, around 9.8 meters per second squared. The higher the G value registered in a turn, the better you are turning. To test the G value suffered by the aircraft, I simply done a 90-degree roll to the left, cut the throttle and did a continued horizontal turn. Again, to minimize errors and standardize testing, the values I've used range from 450 down to 300 km/h. Alright, there's our data. Now I won't bore you to death with the explicit instructions on how to transform it in Excel to get proper values because, trust me, It's boring, it's tedious, and it's very time consuming. But if you do happen to be interested in following my method and want to do stat testing yourself, leave a comment down below. If enough of you sexy beasts are actually interested, I might make a video dedicated on how to calculate these stats in Excel. Alright, enough complications, let's get to the results. The graphs I obtained for the climb rates look like this. You're only looking at the one for the base G2 at the moment, as I had trouble getting them all on the same graph. But what really matters are the averages anyways. As you can see, the base G2 had an average climb rate of around 18.5 meters per second. To note here is that the engine produces the most power at around 2.3 kilometers. So the climb rate actually increases gradually from ground level to that altitude. Next, the G2 with the gun pods. Its average climb rate was 16.9 meters per second, a full 1.6 meters per second lower than the base model. That's about a 8.5% drop in performance. Next, the G2 with maximum fuel load. Interestingly, whilst the fully fueled G2 is about 20 to 30 kilograms heavier than the gun pod G2, it actually climbed slightly faster. That's most likely due to the drag caused by the gun pods. Alright, so the fueled G2 had an average climb rate of 17 meters per second, which is 1.5 meters per second lower than the base model and represents about a 7.7% drop in performance, slightly edging out the gun pod G2. Finally, the G2 with both a maximum fuel load and gun pods equipped. This aircraft is roughly 400 kilograms heavier than the base model and suffers from the drag caused by the gun pods. So how did it perform? Well, with an average climb rate of 15.7 meters per second, it was a full 2.8 meters per second worse, or, in statistical terms, 14.9%. So, as expected, flying around with both a full fuel tank and gun pods is a bad idea. Surprisingly, carrying either one or the other results in just about the same penalty. Next up is acceleration. This is one of the most important stats in any aircraft, yet one of the least explicit. Alright, let's take a look at the results. Again, starting with the graph, we can see a couple of lines. For the acceleration, I've actually managed to get all the results into one graph to better visualize them. The top blue line is the data for the base G2. The grayish one is for the fueled G2, the orange one is for the gun pod G2, and finally the yellow one is for the fully loaded G2. Interestingly, the fueled G2 seems to have about the same acceleration as the gun pod G2 at lower speeds, but gets closer to the base G2 towards its top speed. That is the air resistance effect caused by the gun pods, visualized right there on the graph. The faster you go, the more you suffer from drag. So what do those lines mean in numbers? The base model has an average acceleration of 1.57 meters per second squared. The gun pod G2 had roughly 1.40 meters per second squared, a full 11.4% decrease. Quite substantial actually. The fueled G2 showed a slightly better average of 1.41 meters per second squared, about a 10.6% decrease compared to the base model. Finally, the fully loaded G2 was a huge surprise, having an average acceleration of only 0.78 meters per second squared. That's over 50% less than the base model. You heard that right. Equipping gun pods and a full fuel load on a BF-109 G2 will literally cut your acceleration in half. That's a huge handicap. Alright, let's quickly check the top speeds whilst we're at it. As I've mentioned earlier, the amount of fuel you carry should not affect your top speed. And in fact, it doesn't. Both the base and the fueled G2 had an indicated airspeed maximum of 496 km per hour, with both the gun pod variants dropping down to 488 km per hour, about a 1.6% decrease. So at least the gun pods don't actually affect your top speed all that much. It just takes longer to get there due to the worse acceleration. And finally, let's see how gun pods and fuel loads affect how many Gs you can pull. Again, I've put all the data into the same graph. Top blue line is base G2, the middle line is actually a combination of both the gun pod and the fueled G2, as they had just about the same performance. And the bottom yellow line is the fully loaded G2. Alright, so what do the numbers say? On average, the base model pulled a solid 4 Gs. In comparison, both the gun pod and the fueled G2 pulled around 3.7 Gs on average, around a 6.7% decrease. Finally, having your G2 fully loaded decreases your turn to just about 3.5 Gs, or a 12.7% drop compared to the base model. So, what did we learn? Surprisingly, carrying a full fuel load does not affect the aircraft quite as badly as I expected. In fact, it has less negatives than carrying gun pods. I still wouldn't recommend going with the full fuel load on any fighter though, simply because you can use the added performance of going minimum, and if you're in a position where you're getting shot at, you're having bigger issues than catching fires anyways. As for gun pods, at least in the G2 they don't seem like a bad addition. Sure, your overall performance drops between 5 to 10%, but if you're planning on staying fast without much turning or dropping altitude, the added firepower can be very useful indeed. Finally, just don't carry gun pods and a full fuel tank at the same time. It's suicide. The massive penalty to your acceleration alone is reason enough to never even consider this option. And there we go. Now you know how gun pods and fuel loads affect your aircraft's performance. Before you click away, consider smashing the like button and sharing this video with your friends. Like honestly, the research for this took an extraordinary amount of time, and I'd really appreciate you helping the channel out that way. If you happen to stumble upon this video and you're not yet part of the sexy beasts, do subscribe to the channel and check out my other BluePrints videos. I'll leave a link in the description down below. And that's it for today, lads. Now that I have this tool, it should be much easier and faster to do stat testing. So suggest me some tests you would like to see down in the comments. I might do something like how does carrying bombs affect your performance, or maybe even a direct comparison between two aircraft, but if you have any other interesting ideas, let me know. Finally, since YouTube is still acting kind of weird, and if you really like my content, consider joining the notification squad for extra sexy points. And of course, an alert whenever I upload. But I'm out. Gotta go watch Rogue One. I've heard it's an excellent movie. As always, my name's MikeGoesBoom. Thanks for watching.
You can lift your head up to the sky, take a deeper breath and give it time. You can walk the path among the lines with your shattered frame of mind. Or instead you could always stay. We can wait right here and play until somehow you can find